Hello friends, in this session we will be discussing about the difference between microeconomics and macroeconomics. As all of you know that we have already done a short video on microeconomics that will give you more clarity of that subject. The first difference lies in the meaning. Microeconomics deals with study of individual units, whereas macroeconomics is the study of aggregates. Microeconomics studies only a particular segment of the market, whereas macroeconomics will study the entire market. For example, in the case of capital market, microeconomics will be studying only price fluctuation of certain companies' shares, whereas macroeconomics will study all the companies' shares and the price fluctuations in the exchange. So, in the case of macroeconomics, we are studying aggregate concept, national income, export and import, GDP, GNP, employment of the country. All these things we will study under macroeconomics. Whereas an individual's employment, an individual's income, the consumer choices, all these will be studied under microeconomics. So there is major difference lies in the scope. In microeconomics, we will be studying only few theories which is having a micro perspective. Factor pricing theory, theory of a firm, pricing of product, etc. Whereas in national levels topics, for example, inflation, that we will be studying in macroeconomics. Unemployment theories, tax theories, all these things we will be studying under macroeconomics. Microeconomics gives only a narrow perspective of a particular problem, whereas macroeconomics will give you a broad perspective of the problem. In macroeconomics, we will be studying the impact of inflation, causes of inflation, then we will study what are the types of inflation. All these things we will be studying under macroeconomics. Whereas what is price? How a price is determined? Like very simple topics we will be studying under microeconomics. So you understood. The topic is price, but when we study in a micro level, we will study only how the demand and supply is determining a market price. But in macroeconomics, we will study another perspective of price rising and price falling, stagflation, inflation, all these things we will be studying under macroeconomics. Microeconomics gives a narrow perspective, whereas macroeconomics gives a broader perspective. It takes into account all the dimensions of a particular problem, whereas microeconomics deals with only a particular dimension of the problem. So, this is the major difference between microeconomics and macroeconomics. Another difference lies in the assumptions. In microeconomics, there are assumptions which are not realistic in nature. For example, full employment assumption. Nowhere in the world we can find full employment. There will be a certain degree of unemployment in every economy, whether it is developed, developing or underdeveloped. There will be a certain level of unemployment. So in microeconomics, many theories are explained on the basis of assumptions which are not realistic in nature, whereas macroeconomics more concerned with assumptions which are realistic in nature. For example, when we study employment theories, we are assuming that there is a certain level of unemployment that is called natural rate of unemployment that will be existing in any society, every society. One thing is, whatever is true for aggregate, it may not be true for an individual. So in aggregate economy, the phenomena may be prevailing, but in the case of an individualistic perspective, that may not be true. So whatever we are studying, we have to study it separately in a micro perspective and also in a macro perspective. Another important difference that you should know is demand and supply. As all of you know that these two things determines the price level in the market. So you know that a price is determined where demand is equal to the supply. But what happens when we study this particular concept in a macro level? We will study continuous rise in price, that is called inflation. There are different types of inflation. Some of the inflations are creeping inflation, galloping inflation, hyperinflation, walking inflation, cost push inflation, demand pull inflation. So you see the rise in price have different types of inflation. You understood? So in microeconomics, we are studying only demand and supply, and we are studying the equilibrium price. But in macroeconomics, we are studying price rise, and that also have different levels. What do you mean by inflation? Inflation means continuous sustained increase in price is called inflation. When it is a very low level, we will say that it is creeping inflation. When it is little bit higher, we will say it as walking inflation. When it is more than that, we will say it as running inflation. When it is more than that, we will say it as galloping inflation. When it is very high, we will say it as hyperinflation. So you understood? So in microeconomics, we are studying only a narrow perspective. In macroeconomics, we studied all these things. Not only types of inflation. In macroeconomics, we will study different dimensions, causes of inflation. What are all the causes? Increase in cost, reduction in output, increase in government expenditure, taxation policies, demand push inflation is there, cost push inflation is there, demand pull inflation is there. So there are different causes for inflation also. In continuous price rise in inflation, we will study the impact also. So macroeconomics covers all these dimensions. How it is affecting an ordinary people's life, how it is affecting salaried people, how it is affecting borrowing, how it is affecting spending. All this impact we will study. So in short, we can say that microeconomics studies only limited perspectives. It is narrower. Whereas macroeconomics studies multiple dimension of the particular issue. For example, increase in price level, that is inflation. I hope you clearly understood the difference between microeconomics and macroeconomics. Thank you so much for listening. If you liked my video, please give me a thumbs up and do recommend this channel to your friends also. Stay safe, study well. Thank you so much for listening.